Alright, so my name is Sergio. We're here in Extinction Rebellion, Southeast Queensland. Today I'm going to be presenting a bit about what non-violent rebellion means. So I just wanted to put a disclaimer out there that I am Sergio, and in this space I do not speak on behalf of the group or Extinction Rebellion. I am my own person. I've learned a little bit about the way that mass participation, civil disobedience, movements of the past have achieved system change. So that's what I want to impart on you today as we look forward to October and what we're going to do there. Alright, so there is two components of movement building, where you've got movement growing and then movement mobilisation. So far, Southeast Queensland, we've been doing a lot of movement growing, employing some strategies of civil disobedience, and on October we do movement mobilisation, which looks very different from what we've all seen for the past few decades in Western countries. So, I'm going to be talking about what mobilisation looks like. Mobilisation in October and when we mobilise in the future. So that's that. We're talking about the mobilisation component. There is some nuance in the movement building process. Okay, so I have a few assumptions to start with. So my assumptions is that people are emotional in general, that people are decent, they see themselves as decent, they try to act decently. The other assumption is that death is bad, sort of transcultural value that I hope we all agree on, but this is an assumption. And the other is that police are people, humans, brains in society, part of the workforce. So which means they are part of this process as well. And the other assumption is that 2 + 1 = 3. What that means is a basic understanding of arithmetic. So once you have a basic understanding of arithmetic, you look at a little bit of the science, not too much. We know that 2 degrees of warming is locked in. So death is bad, 2 degrees of warming, we're looking at very dangerous climate for our species, and this continues because of some other factors called feedback loops and tipping points, but the whole idea is that we are heading for extinction. So what that means is that there's 2 options when you're heading for extinction. You do nothing and you go extinct, or you do something even if you're not sure if it's going to work and you choose rebellion anyway. So those are my assumptions. So the other, in my derivation of the fact that people are decent, that death is bad, and that arithmetic is understandable, is that putting your life on hold for a bit so you don't die is a good idea and probably easy. So, house is burning down, you've got an assignment due tomorrow, let's stop writing the assignment and deal with the situation at hand. We can get back to it, or you'll fail, but you didn't die. Yeah, cool. So, one of the main things that Extinction Rebellion tries to do is to tell the truth and then act as if that truth is real. So telling the truth, realizing 2 degrees is locked in, that we're heading for extinction, and then acting as if the truth is real, in my opinion, because we're decent, means rebellion. So, what does rebellion mean? It means civil disobedience. It means to win, we're looking at needing mass participation in civil disobedience. This doesn't mean petitions or marches. Civil disobedience has a few key aspects. The first aspect is disruption. Petitions are not disruptive. You do disruption so that you get a response. You hand a letter to someone you don't like, you tell them you don't like them, they read it and say, okay, fine, that's fine. You need to do something that triggers a reaction. So that's why disruption is necessary. The other key component, which is a little bit, seems controversial in the movement, which is fair enough because we haven't been really dwelling in civil disobedience very much in this, the last 30 years of fighting climate change, especially not mass participation in civil disobedience. So, sacrifice. This means leaving the house when you're on fire, sacrificing maybe getting a better grade because you have less time. In the real world, this means when you're challenging the state because the state is heading for extinction, sacrifice means confronting that state in whatever way you can. It needs to be respectful. This is because people don't like when you're mean. People are decent, so people will side with you if you are decent because you are then like that. It's also just easier to talk with, in this case, the government, the system, if you are respectful, because people will just be irrationally not receptive to you if you are telling them that they're terrible people, you're good, they're bad, go away. This needs to be respectful. So, in all aspects of our actions, we need to be respectful. In the mass mobilization period, this needs to be done day after day. This is because the state can handle disruption, okay? We have traffic jams all the time. We have, the stock price collapsing. We've got disruptions in society that are norms, disruptions in society that the society can move past. So the idea is that it has to be day after day to put real pressure on the system. There's some more reasons why you do it day after day, which I can go into later. And the other key component is to get for society to participate in this. So to avoid isolation, everyone needs to get involved. Luckily, with climate change, everyone's involved, which is why I see such a diverse group of people in front of me from all parts of society. This is because if a small group of people that look a certain way, do a certain thing, they can easily be isolated, demonized, and seen as the other. We are not the other, we are society. We are everyone. Okay. So, to achieve system change, we need to implement all factors of the civil disobedience framework. Again, disruption, day after day disruption. Sacrifice, willing to sacrifice. Respectfulness in that sacrifice and in that disruption, because we are trying to save everyone and to get everyone on board. So there's a commonly known about bit of research done by Erica Chenoweth. Erica studied hundreds of movements, both violent and non-violent, since 1900, and found a few things out. One of them was that non-violent campaigns are twice as likely to succeed, and violent campaigns, if they succeed, often turn into civil war within 5 years, 95% chance. So that's not an option. That's why one of our 10 principles and values is that we are a non-violent network. The other really interesting thing that was found out was when a movement surpassed 3.5% of the population actively participating day after day, there was a 100% success rate. With all of the cases that were studied, both violent and non-violent, that won, there were a surprising amount of people involved, and surprising because it's small. So what we're looking at needing to achieve is 1 to 3% of the population. The French Revolution had some interesting tactics. We're not going to be using any of those. They mobilized 1% of people to do that. Yeah, in other places, this has been happening all over history, all the time, bringing down dictators, making life better for people because they band together, and they is a small percentage of the population. So with this theory of change, with system change, with mass participation, civil disobedience, you don't need to play into the systems game of getting the majority of people actively out there, because the reason for that is because all the time the majority of people don't do politics. A very small percentage of the population is actually sort of engaged in the way that society works, and other people have different roles to play. But yeah, 3.5% is the aim, and they need to be doing disruptive, sustained participation. So what that means is that when you mobilize, you need to be doing something that is disruptive. The way that it is disruptive is that you can't let them, is that the state can't let you do it. So they have to either, repress you, whether that's, tell you to go home. If you don't, beat you on the head, put you in jail, whatever. Or they can agree with you, they can meet your demands, everyone's happy and they go home. So we're in pretty entrenched power that is fueling the climate crisis. So what that means is that we are looking at requiring a lot of people to do a lot of sacrificing. The great thing is, the sacrifice is better than extinction. So that's sort of a no-brainer there. So I have a few examples of disruption and repression and winning here. So the classic example of protesting is a march. It's alright, it's easy to do. So the sort of diagram goes, this is the winning bar. You need to do disruption, and the length of these arrows is what does it cost. So the response to your actions will always be the sort of lowest cost thing. So when a march is happening, it's hard and annoying to arrest 3,000 people because they're marching for 2 hours. So the easiest course of action is to let them do it. So not enough disruption, you don't get repression, you don't have to sacrifice anything, you're going to get away with it. 2 people on a road, very disruptive because, you're on a road and there's traffic everywhere. But the price of repression, the price of taking you away is very small. Police take 2 people away all the time for things, and so the lowest, the easiest course of action is to repression. and we've seen that exists. 1,000 people on a road. This is what happened in Brisbane in August 6th. About 1,000 people at 1 William Street. The easiest course of action is to let you do it. It's sort of similar to a march, but they just wait for you to go. 5,000 people on 10 roads. So the disruption is times by 10. The amount of repression that it requires is times by 5, but you end up the lowest. The easiest thing to do is to repress you because they cannot let you block 10 roads. So then they'll do that. Now the aim of the game is to get enough people there so that the repression bar is higher. So it costs a lot to repress you. But they're going to let you do it if you're doing something that they can let you do. So your design is finding a thing that you can do together so that they have to either repress you or negotiate. They cannot let you do it. If they let you do it, you lose. So an example could be 5,000 people on 10 roads for 20 days. What that means is they don't leave, or when a person does get repressed, or in this context, what will probably happen is they will go to the watch house, get charged, get fed, get let out the same or the next day. Then they go back and join in. The Brisbane watch house can sleep about 100 people. So you can sort of do the math. So that's everyone goes to the capital cities because they're important to the state and to the entrenched power. You sit down where you're definitely not allowed to sit down, and you tell them your demands, and they choose. This is a dilemma. They choose. Do they agree with you? Do they meet your demands, or do they try to repress you? So that's the mechanism that has literally brought down dictators. The civil disobedience framework is based on sacrifice. So it's actually almost easier to win when the security force is willing to repress you, because people are emotional, people are decent, which means if you're doing the good thing, they will come and join you. And if 1% of the population is sitting down in the capital and the dictator, whoever, says, point your gun at the people and shoot them, my proposal is that police are people. So police have families, police have communities, and police are emotional and decent. So I reckon they won't do it. So once the state can't repress you, you win. There's no other option. So, an example. The Birmingham Campaign of 1967, civil rights movement. The Children's March. There was a segregation line. There was going to be a march across the segregation line. The state was extremely repressive, and they were telling the students, we are going to imprison you if you do this. So it was game on. This happened frequently, the marches, and thousands of kids knew what the consequences would be, knew what the sacrifice would be. The teachers at at school, they turned their backs, the kids left the classroom, went to the protest, got sprayed with water cannons, hurt, rounded up, sent into a bus, and went to prison. By the hundreds, by the thousands. After a few weeks, the prisons were full, and it was a party. The police commissioner came out and said, "We don't know what to do. The kids are having a party in the prison. We filled the prisons, and they're still here." My proposal would be that the reason why hundreds and thousands of kids got behind the few kids that started it is because they wouldn't let that happen. They would stand with the people that are doing the right thing, because people are decent and people are emotional. A few months later, the Civil Rights Campaign won. It was interesting because there was massive protests and stuff like that before then. The catalyst was sacrifice. And the thing that I've been trying to grapple with is the fact that civil rights is a good idea. Everyone knew that. And yet, we are facing extinction rapidly. And how controversial would it be for me to propose that thousands of kids would go and get sent to prison over stopping climate change, over avoiding climate breakdown? It would be crazy in the current sort of ideas about how you do things. But the problem is, well, simple: death or not. So that's why, if hundreds of people are willing to sacrifice a lot, thousands will join. It doesn't take many to start, but the people that love you and that realize that you're doing the right thing will stand by you. So on October, we mobilise with full utilisation of the civil disobedience framework. We have declared ourselves in rebellion against the government out of our ethical duty to not die, and thousands will join us. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what happened with Extinction Rebellion in London that started on the 15th of April this year, 2019. Something that a lot of people don't realise is that there was a possibility that they could win. It wasn't zero. I would suggest that all mobilisations before April 15th about climate change had a 0% chance of winning, of getting the demands that are reasonable, which is system change, not policy change, not protecting a certain area, system change. So they didn't win, okay? This is because we live in a complex system. Who knows what's going to happen? So for example, Occupy. Some people went to a park and occupied a park for a week. Nothing happened. A month later, they did it again. The Globe responded, and I don't even know the numbers, but we all saw what happened. So you just need to do the thing and then see what happens. What Roger Hallam, who I learned a lot from, calls roll the dice, because it's a complex system. So I'll give you some sort of facts about the sort of design of the rebellion in London this April. So, unlike the Occupy movement, which they learnt from, the police can let you take one spot if there's a lot of people, which we sort of need. So their design was to take 5 locations and try to hold them. And this was so that the police repressed them. This was so that people got arrested. Because that's the catalyst to mobilizing people with hearts that exist and stuff. Yeah, so the design principle was that it was too disruptive to let it happen. So an interesting fact is, so one site got taken back by the police the first day, I think Waterloo Bridge in the following few days, maybe on the 4th day or something like that. And then the 3rd site got taken, and slowly but surely there was less sites being occupied. In the first week of the rebellion, over 1,000 arrests, over 1,000 people got arrested. In the next, 4 days, about 200 people got arrested. So this is because less sites were taken. Once they got down to just a few sites, the police weren't doing anything about it, they were letting it happen. So what people had to do, a bit awkward, was go out in groups and put themselves on a road or do some property damage or something like this so that the police would repress them. So, but that's the design. The other fact was that they were doing it day after day. So this really hasn't happened much or maybe ever in the climate movement of the past. We haven't really had a public mass mobilization that happened day after day. The message was that they would start on April 15th and they would see what happens, because we're in rebellion against the government. We're not going to go home the next day because we've done that before and it's failed, and we need to do so much that they can't let it happen. So yeah, there was no end date, just like there isn't in October, where every group of Extinction Rebellion will do the thing. The thing is going to the Capitol, sitting down, and where they definitely can't sit down and see what happens. And they won't leave. Yeah. So I would expect for some countries to get some pretty interesting results, getting a few percent of the population there. We will see. The other interesting thing about London was that there was quite a loving culture. The security forces, while they had their job to do, they did respect what was happening, and yeah, it was festive, it was loving, because that's respectful, and people want to join that because people are lonely and want to have fun, and what's a rebellion without having fun? So that's why it was really cool. Some of the things that they tried to do to sort of increase the attraction of it was they made it really musical with dancing circles, showing bands, this kind of stuff, all throughout the night and the day. They had notables, so this was famous people come and speak on specific days, bands and this kind of stuff. The other thing was that people had autonomy to do whatever they wanted under the 10 principles and values during the rebellion, which meant that people that are interested in different kinds of tactics can get involved. What that means is, you can invite people that are interested in different things, so different parts of society to actually get involved. And the other main thing about mobilizing your society is to remember that most people don't think about politics and don't really care So while it can seem political because it's looking at system change, it's really not. It's about survival. So they had a whole space that was set up to facilitate people's assemblies where people would talk about issues and not be like asking the government about things, but would use their own voice. And the idea was it's beyond politics because it's about survival. So in Australia, in Southeast Queensland, we'll be mobilising in Brisbane City. We have 4 demands. The first demand is climate action. This is reducing carbon dioxide emissions by 0 before 2025. Implementing drawdown technologies for sort of carbon capture, even though that's a little bit dodgy, but we'll see how it goes. Hopefully the government can help facilitate that because that's what we need, because we're way too far in the climate crisis to just not be drawing down stuff. And 100% renewables. So first demand, no carbon dioxide for 5 years, 100% renewable, and let's fix it. Second demand is preserve biodiversity. This means ending land clearing, which facilitates, we don't want to get rid of the lungs of the planet because they actually facilitate some of the drawdown. So ending land clearing and giving nature legal rights. So this is sort of what we want to see in the future. We know that we are dependent on nature. We haven't learned the hard way, so nature needs some rights as well. To tell the truth, so this is to spread the science and report on all facts honestly. This is because so far the governments of the world have been not appropriately forecasting the truth, which is that we are on a collision course toward extinction and that they aren't willing to do anything about it. And the fourth demand is about the future that we want to see and the society that we want to live in to make sure this doesn't happen again. So, dismantle colonial systems of exploitation. This is because we're in Australia, a colony. So that means decolonize oppressive government structures and replace them with systems of self-management and true participatory democracy. Our representatives have failed us. It's not working, so we need to replace it with normal people that are not dependent on the entrenched power of the ruling class. Because the ruling class is the ruling class because we let it happen. So they rely on us complying with them, with their state. And the idea is that they give us protection, but they have broken that contract, which is why we're in rebellion against the government. Yeah.
Just time check. I'm conscious that people do need to leave in a bit over an hour.
Okay.
We want to discuss some stuff. So what's your intention for how long we'll do this and then we'll move on?
Yeah. I'm gonna wrap up. Yeah. Actually, yeah. Does anyone have any questions about this? Yeah.
In relation to, I guess, winning and the negotiation, at what point would we be happy and consider something a win? Because with 4 large demands, at what point do we go, okay, well, you've looked at the first demand being climate action, and maybe we're going to talk about, okay, we will say that a target is 0 degrees increase by the year 2025. Obviously, hopefully that happens. Is that something that we'd be like, okay, we're going to go away now, we consider that a win? Or?
Right. So the idea is we're in rebellion against the government until the government meets our demands. In my opinion, we believe that all of our demands must be met because they all sort of rely upon each other for the kind of change that's actually necessary. So we'll be looking for all of our demands to be met, in my opinion, and that will be decided upon by the people that are in rebellion against the government. So this means facilitating true participatory democracy to figure out if we're happy with what the government has agreed to. So some ideas is people's assemblies. We've got a working group that's working on how to run them. So for example, on the 7th day, I believe, of the rebellion in London, there was a people's assembly. 3,000 people participated. The question was, do we leave, and if so, when? And the answer from the people was, yeah, we should leave at some point, and I reckon maybe on the 11th day to signify that we've got 11 years to go. But the reason why they left is because they didn't leave. So, yeah, that's how decisions sort of can be made. Yeah. Other questions?
Sorry, I missed the earlier question, so I don't know if this question's already been asked. So, you are suggesting that police are people too. What if police in the state aren't decent?
So that's an interesting one. So it seems like the mass participation civil disobedience campaigns of the past, one of the key elements where you're pretty much going to win is when you have what's called security force defection. So whether or not police are people, or some police are people, your design really are just about maximising culpability.
So, while I was here, you didn't mention some of the potential risks involved with going up against the police.
Yes, exactly.
In particular, the police kill black people in jails, or particularly kill black people in jails, and the state lets homeless people die on the street. And so I think it's really important that we don't assume that either the police or the state are decent now. And I really am uncomfortable with a winning strategy that requires them to become decent at some point in the future. Because I don't think that the state is like that. And I also think that a big risk of explaining things like you have is that it makes it feel like you don't understand the experiences of First Nations people in Australia and their interactions with the prison system and their interactions with law enforcement in the state. And yeah, look, I found it triggering, and I'm white. So my big request to you here is you need to work out how to explain this better. Because even suggesting to people who've had bad experiences with the cops that cops are decent people is just not very helpful. And it's really not something we should rely on.
It's an assumption. I'm not saying whether I'm assuming that, right? So this is just because of what is sort of required. But personally, I would hope that the people of privilege in this country take on the responsibility of representing the minorities. So for example, I'm an Australian citizen and I won't get shot on going to a protest, whereas people in other countries that are suffering from climate breakdown might, so I sort of see it as my responsibility to do that. So for example, I wouldn't be advocating for people in Saudi Arabia to go and protest the government because it's heading for extinction. So I would suggest that people of privilege globally actually take on that mantle and then elevate those voices.
Can I process point? Just process point. We only have about an hour left, and this is a huge discussion. we do want to talk about plans.
Yeah, let's do
Would
it.
it be okay with everybody if we use our time for that and then have this discussion at another point?
No, I'm really uncomfortable with plans that depend on some of these assumptions.
Okay.
And so I would like plans that work even if police are not decent. And I want us, as we plan, to make sure that our plans are robust in the face of that. And I'm happy to stop talking about that now, but yeah, I don't want to plan based on these assumptions.
Any process suggestions? Okay.
Process suggestion, I think this is a really important conversation, but I'm also mindful of time. So I think if anyone wants to keep talking about it, then maybe like hop under the principles of holacracy, right? People can stay there and keep talking about it. I'm personally interested in how we get First Nations people in the centre of this movement and we're growing that, but I also think we need to plan because I think Sergeio you tried talking about, and this is of course going to involve sacrifice, and I hope that those of us who've profited and benefited most from the system which has made us rich, wealthy and comfortable will be willing to make the most sacrifice, and that does include being mindful of people who suffer from oppression and are in the system. So it's an important conversation when I have it. I also want to spend time planning. So I'm proposing that people want to go up and plan and get on with the rest of the agenda keep doing that, and people who want to talk about this stuff, which is very important, can stay here and talk about this stuff. That's just under the principles of holacracy that I would
So we get too much Derek on that. Cool. Alright, so we'll need to go grab some paper, but yeah, we're going to get into groups of 3 to 5, and we're going to, write out some brainstorms about how we facilitate October 7th. So it could be tactics on media, or it could be tactics on regenerative culture, or it could just be tactics of actually disrupting or sacrificing, or these kinds of things. But sort of free game, this information is going to be sent back to the action logistics team to have a look at it and figure out some processes to properly plan it with everyone else's participation.
So are we trying to work out how to make the sweet spot of winning? Or
Yes. I guess so.
Sorry, you asked Jenny.
So we're specifically talking about actions for October 7th?
I wouldn't talk about specific actions. So I wouldn't talk about, oh, we should get some people to do this thing. It's what is our design strategy to make it so disruptive they can't let us do it, and how do we get enough people to be willing to get repressed so that we reach our negotiation